Okay, we're the 5th of April 2023, and as I start recording this video, it's 7:15 a.m. broadly, and I'm preparing my German breakfast, and I intend to record a video that I don't know if or when I will publish the video, but I just will share some thoughts kind of randomly. I've thought maybe I will do this for a while at least, because I have been preparing, and I'm still preparing ordered, structured video where I show all my documents, etc., etc. But when I do this, I have the feeling that I have been doing kind of my serious job, and then I can relax a little bit, which means I can afford psychologically in a way to be more how should I say this, spontaneous, in a sense, making videos like these that I don't even know when or if I will publish them, but simply I feel less guilty for just talking normally without the conceptual apparatus inherent in German, one might say. Yeah. So I intend to talk about psychology. UPS, I will talk about my singular case, but if there is another person watching this, you might be able to extract the particular and the universal out of my singular experience. And I know that humans, they appreciate when they can relate to another, because I know when I speak about my metaphysics, it's too complex, it's too abstract. People, they don't really like this, or very few people appreciate this because it's too brilliant, maybe. So yeah. So I intend to record the video, which will not be longer than 30 minutes. I will set a time limit while I'm preparing and eventually taking my breakfast. Yeah. I will start cooking. This is an onion and a potato. Yeah. Locally bought and grown and organic. And where is... I had prepared... Where is... I haven't had the opportunity to clean my room yesterday evening because I have been working. That's why it's a bit messed up. I don't know, but I'm searching for... Where is... Ah, it's here. I produce my own orange juice to avoid the plastic, etc., etc. That's ecological virtue signaling. So yeah, about psychology. In a way, the non-dualistic or non-dualist view of being, or of the world, or of the universe, or of reality, one might say. It's here I really simplify, but actually Lady Gaga made a great song about this, Born This Way. The world, whether physical, chemical, biological, psychological, economic, social, political, at all levels actually, is kind of it's more complicated than that, but it can be envisioned as an opposition or a tension between opposing contradictory forces. In physics, there is the positive and negative electricity, positive and negative electric charges at all levels of the material world, but also I've been reading, because sometimes I take the time to read good books, the movement of the celestial bodies. It's the result of an equilibrium, a balance between opposing tendency, namely the moon or any asteroid or any planet or any satellite would like to go in a straight line in a way, but it is kept within a harmonious movement because of the attractive pulse of the gravitational pulse of the Earth in the case of the moon, but or the sun in the case of all the planets, the gravity center which attracts all the bodies revolving around. So the movement of the moon around the Earth, or the Earth around the Sun, is the result of an equilibrium, a balance between it's not the will, but it's because here that's psychological projection onto inanimate object, but the tendency that the moving body has to go in a straight line to follow its trajectory, and it is kept within the solar system or around the Earth in the case of the moon, or for every satellite around the planet around which it revolves, by the gravitational pull or attraction. So there are contradictory tendencies, and the result is some sort of a harmony of movement. Yeah. And we find this at all levels. That's a kind of positive and negative in logical terms, but it is found at all levels. In the animal world, there is a tendency, contradiction between competition and cooperation, in economics as well, in politics as well, etc., etc. And that's the yin and yang, if you will. Chaos and order. They are found at all levels of the physical world, one might say, because the physical and chemical interactions between all substances, here the chemical substances, is an attempt to find stability because of the inherent chaotic, actually it's not really chaotic, but the movement of the material world, which seeks to find balance. That's the driving force behind chemical transformation on a molecular, atomic, molecular, and chemical levels at all the layers of the physical, chemical, and then biological world. What drives the movement of animals or even plants is an attempt to secure resources, to find chemical balance within the brain or within the organism. Yeah. And in my document, I will not show the document precisely because, yeah, but the phenomenal appearance of mind. There are opposed determinations, like the yin and yang, at all layers of the human world, anthropology and sociology in a broader sense, namely subjective and objective Geist, I simplify, and because that's a relativity in a way, and balance and stability and peace is to be found in the center, in the middle, and this is what I wouldn't say everyone seeks. Maybe yes, but they seek balance by pushing or pulling towards their own side, and that's why there is a constant conflict or constant torment or constant tension at all levels of the entire world. And I know from an abstract standpoint precisely that the truth, peace, balance, stability is in the middle. The neutrality, I know this is kind of true, but it's easier said than done, and it's very difficult to identify the proper balance, the proper measure in all the cases. It's kind of difficult, but here I just take one example that I'm fully aware of to illustrate this. In the case of anthropology, I just take a concrete example to illustrate. I have already said this many times, and I will keep saying this as long as I have to, but in the modern Western world, in terms of anthropology, there is a tension between anti-racism, which has really become excessive and kind of insane, and the dialectical response, which is an attempt to find balance, actually, is the return of kind of racism, which can be excessive as well. And here, that's the trick. Anti-racism is kind of a moral order, but it brings chaos in the sciences because it tries to erase all the distinction, and the erasure of all distinctions, that's precisely chaos. And order is the emergence of distinction and categorization out of chaos. So the anti-racists, they try to bring moral order by using epistemological chaos. I simplify, they are even most of the time unaware of this, and racists, they want to bring epistemological order to acknowledge the distinction between the various ethnic groups, but it can bring chaos if it is turned into political action. So, in the case, there's the question of race, which is an important topic in the modern Western world. The truth is in the center. I know it's the truth, namely what I call race realism, exemplified by Charles Murray. Namely, the truth is to speak intelligently about race, to acknowledge that there are racial differences, biological, psychological, and then cultural, historically. That's just intelligent debate, and when it is true, that's the scientific ideal in a way. When a work about ethnic differences between humans, when it is true, if the person who reads and understands this is intelligent, whatever his other determination, origin, gender, age, culture, etc., if he is intelligent, he has to acknowledge the accuracy of the work, in a way. In the sense, science, that's an old ideal of the Renaissance, Erasmus, etc. Science is supposed to bring unity of minds by common agreement on truth, by the search for the truth and eventually a common agreement. So here, that's the illustration. Race realism, epistemologically, whose political consequence is intelligent debate, like someone like Charles Murray advocates, and Thomas Sowell as well, that's the American ideal. That's the reconciliation between the excesses of the left, the modern left, which pretends that there are no differences, and the excesses of the right, which can be negative racism in the sense of hatred against another group because it is different, which is kind of a primitive mentality that the left adopts as well, but on a moral perspective. But the balance is to take the best of the left, which is an attempt to solve conflicts, and the best of the right, which is an attempt to be realistic, etc. And the synthesis, that's not a synthesis, but the concrete unity, that's to advocate debate, intelligent dialogue, search for the truth, the scientific ideal, the liberal in the noble sense, classical liberal, which today would be libertarian ideal of peaceful discussion, the ideal of science. That's why historically, I will take care of my German breakfast. Historically, the liberal ideal, classical liberal, is precisely an attempt to solve conflicts by promoting the intelligent exchange of ideas. So, that's an illustration. But actually, that's an example of a concrete unity, namely to take the best of both sides and to leave aside the negative tendency on the left side that would be epistemological delusion and also partly moral bigotry, but on the right that would be hatred and primitive tribal thinking, but it is also found on the left, and potential violence and oppression, etc. So to leave aside really the worst aspects of both sides, to take the best, and that's the middle, the truth in the center. That's the compromise in an intelligent way, and it works at all levels. Here I took the example of race because I've been thinking about this for many years, but I wanted to talk about psychology for the remaining 12 minutes. Within each man, here I talk about dualism, but for the complex people there are more than two sides. Of course, life, because I've been reading the book about the great jihad and the struggle against the self. Every human struggles against himself because there are conflicting tendencies within the human psyche, not only two, but and my problem, I could talk about my problem for hours and hours, but I will try to be as brief as possible. I have a tendency to be hyper intellectual, which is an attempt to negate, unconsciously in a way, to negate biology. Because the biological instincts, they can be a little bit embarrassing. I will not illustrate. But I have realized, because of my interactions with empirical people along the year 2022, that an excess of intellect, it can be problematic for others as well. Very problematic, because when people react most of the time negatively when you talk to them about very complex abstract determination, maybe the problem comes from, here I talk about my personal case, maybe the problem comes from me, and actually it does. And so I have tried to adapt to others to speak. That's why I'm doing with this kind of video, where I speak randomly, normally, without my system, etc. But I have a need, a will to have a rigorous view. That's my German view. My kind of insane, crazy self is also partly German. But I have really a spontaneous tendency towards really rigor, intellectual rigor, systematicity. And I know that it's kind of good, it's really good, but if it's excessive, and I know that I have the tendency to be excessive about this, I try to restrict myself to avoid really the excessive boring aspect, because I enjoy reading boring books. I mean, boring for others, for me they are fascinating. Kant, Hegel, and even Leibniz, all the Heidegger, all the great Fichte, Schelling, Nietzsche. It's not boring, because it's always full of illustrations and poetry, yeah. But the boring, typical philosophical text that is most of classical philosophy is considered boring from a formal standpoint, but actually it's fascinating. But the most boring of the classical philosophers on a formal standpoint, these are the Germans, of course. And I have a tendency to have this really systematic, and I have noticed, which can be kind of totalitarian will to understand and eventually to control intellectually everything. And I know it's negative, so I try to balance by being more spontaneous, etc. But yeah. Because here I will talk about religion. First I will take care of the cooking of the eggs. Yeah. 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 In most traditional religions, the enemy that you have to struggle against is the negative biological tendencies, in temptation of the flesh and the devil, as they call this in the traditional Catholic Church. And of course, it's partly true. It's really a simplification, but it's true. You have to struggle against your negative biological tendencies, and that's a constant struggle. But modern sociobiology explains that not all people, either ethnic groups or individuals within each ethnic group, there is diversity within homogeneous group, but if you take humans with their anthropological differences, either collective or individual, impulsiveness, as they call this, is different within each person, and for some people it's much more easy, it's easier to control their impulsive biological tendency because they are biologically programmed to do so. Here, Mongoloids, they have a really lower level of testosterone, which the consequence is they are more civilized and they are more prone towards peaceful social interaction. Empirically, and it has been verified, and so they have a lower, they are more apt to control some of their biological tendency, which has good aspects, which has enabled peaceful cooperation, more peaceful in the history of East Asia, more peaceful, relatively more peaceful than Europe, for instance, historically. But the counterpart is lack of individual creativity. That's what people like Edward Dutton, Richard Lynn, etc., they talk about. The reason why Europe has come to dominate is not because of a higher intelligence, but because of a higher individualistic impulses. I simplify. So more disruption in a way, which has historically caused many conflicts among Europeans. I simplify, but yeah. And so so for most people, struggle against the self is a struggle against the negative, lower biological tendency. It can be more or less difficult depending on the biological wiring of the people. And of course, for every human has this kind of struggle to try to restrict the primitive biological tendency. But for highly intelligent people of all origins, the negativity can be the opposite, namely an excess of intellectualization. And here it's not very widespread. And that's why very few religions talk about this. But actually, the Buddhist religion, the Buddha, he was very intelligent. He talks, I've not read the text of the Buddhist thoroughly, but actually when they talk about the Evola talks about the demons of dialectics, actually the Buddhist, it's a religion which has appealed to relatively highly intelligent people. They try to find stability within the mind. They do not insist too much on the biological impulses, although they do as well, but it's really to find peace of mind, to try to avoid the excess of overthinking in a way. And the excess of overthinking, it's the counterpart of really highly intelligent people of the kind of primitive biological tendencies of less intelligent people, but it's found in both in a way. But the struggle of really highly intelligent people, there is partly the struggle against the biological tendency, but there's also the struggle against an excess of overthinking. That has been and that still is my problem. And here, interacting with empirical people, with the muggles, very interesting, these muggles, has helped me a lot to cure my own problems, which are not very extended quantitatively for other names. There are very few people comparatively proportionally who suffer from an excess of intellect, because it affects only very intelligent people. But I have noticed that maybe what I suffer from is maybe a lack of spontaneity, and I have a very high sense of shame and guilt every time that I make a mistake, because I have a high how do you call it, I think it's self-consciousness, not in the German metaphysical view, but in a psychological meaning. Namely, I'm very well aware of the mistakes that I do when I notice them. I can be ignorant because of my autism. There are really things I'm really dumb on some aspect because of autism. But when I understand that I do something wrong, I have this is typical of white people. Especially intelligent white people, I have this moral signal, something wrong, I have to shun, I have to apologize, I have to feel guilty. I receive the signal. In this, I'm a very moral person in the kind of a negative sense for the self. Namely, I am constantly tormented morally because I'm aware of every mistake that I do. I'm burdened by guilt and remorse and shame for every failure that I do, and it's kind of good in a way. For most people, most peoples, it's considered good. But the problem here, it's a problem specific to white people, especially in modernity. It's that it brings about neurotic excesses of people who try to suppress every biological tendency, which here means kind of healthy tendency. It comes from a good intention, but the result is a collective psychosis in a way. Okay, maybe it will be slightly longer than 30 minutes because I intend to eat my breakfast, but expressed in ordinary language, which has already been the case. My problem here, I speak as a singular individual. That's a psychoanalytical therapy session. Yeah. It's a problem only for me, and which affects very few people, is that uptight, they call this in English, a little bit uptight, I think. I am burdened by guilt constantly. Guilt and shame. And here, Nietzsche is kind of an antidote. It's also a poison, but Nietzsche is the poisonous antidote to Kant and Hegel. Kant, that would be moral fanaticism, that Nietzsche tries to bring balance to by enlightening some of the hidden assumption of Kantian moral purity, and Hegel, that would be intellectual fanaticism. Nietzsche, when it's excessive, that the will to power, so they all have their excesses, the Germans. And here I will say something intelligent that I've been thinking about yesterday. For really complex, in a good sense, relationships, it's not dual, it's a triad, a trinity. And I realized this while thinking about the Legend of Zelda games and the Triforce and the various powers in a tripartite structure have to balance one another. In Zelda games, this is wisdom, courage, and power, I think. Yeah. And in politics, that's legislative, executive, judicial branches of classical, liberal, in the good sense, not a modern insanity, but a classical liberal balance of power, exemplified in the Anglo-Saxon political model, where the legislators have been wise enough to know that there has to be restriction to power, and that the various powers, they have to balance one another. And this historically this is what has prevented Anglo-Saxon countries from falling into tyranny, at least since the age of Cromwell, which maybe it was a little bit excessive, but England, whatever one say, here I am not in a mood to trash talk the English, really I am praising the English. The political history of England, when I'm in a stable mood, I say it's kind of a model, because in spite of all their dubious decisions, competing with the Germans, they have always remained politically stable, even in times of difficult, and the same goes for the Americans, at least on a national territory. Of course, there is the secession war, etc. But other than that, it has been relatively stable in home politics, and that's the typical characteristic of all Anglo-Saxon countries in modernity. They are more stable in a way than the French and the Germans and other European countries, And it's due to a reciprocal limiting of conflicting tendencies. That's the harmonious balance of power due not to two opposing tendencies, although it can be Tory and Whigs, Democrats, Republicans, left and right, etc. But actually, it's more complex than that. And yeah. And here, I talk about psychology. My problem, I have many problems. One way of formulating my problem is that I am aware that the truth is in the center. It's to be reasonable, to be balanced, to be neutral in an intelligent way, the way Switzerland is neutral. That's peace and stability and responsibility and that this is really good not in a moralistic sense, but in a reasonable sense. To be moderate, not in a soft modern sense of the moderates, these are the conservative in a way, no, but to be moderate, measured, balanced. I know it's good and I know it's true. Here, the boring German metaphysician, when he talks about Leibniz, he says that precisely the view of the virtues of God, according to Leibniz, it's a reciprocal balancing of the virtues, namely the justice of God has to be balanced by the goodness, and the goodness has to be limited by justice. So good, in order to be good, has to be just. It has to be balanced. And I know that I have a tendency to be excessive as a singular individual. For many endeavors, I tend to be excessive. When I invest myself in a project, I invest myself fully. I'm fully dedicated. I'm passionate. When I love someone, I love this person passionately. It sounds good, but so here I'm serious. I know that I have a tendency to be excessive, and I'm aware. So when I realize, I try to balance, but my excessive self would say that, of course, the truth and clarity is in the middle, but it's kind of boring. No, it's not boring, but I have a conflict. That's why I intended to talk about when I started this video. I have a conflict within me between a sense of responsibility and seeking balance. That's really the Apollinian enlightenment ideal of measure, temperance, moderation, etc. Of course, when I talk about temperance, I have no problem in temperating my material consumption, but sometimes my temper precisely can be a little bit excessive, and I know that I have this tendency to be excessive, so I try to restrict. But when I try to restrict my tendency because I'm excessive, that's an excess of restriction and regulation and restraint for myself, so I become a little bit insane. That's sometimes my excessive puritanical self, one might say. So here I speak honestly. I'm a little bit frustrated because I know the truth abstractly, that it has to be balanced in the middle, etc. And I also am aware that I have a tendency to be excessive, so I'm aware that I make kind of mistakes. And sometimes I'm frustrated because, of course, I would like, and ideally, That's the purpose. I want to be balanced and to be really to be balanced in the best sense, to be mature, to grow up, to be wise eventually, of course. But the problem is that it's an ideal which requires struggle against the self, which is good when it's properly balanced, but it means to negate really a lot of spontaneous tendencies. And because I have a tendency to be excessive, sometimes I have to be honest, sometimes I'm really frustrated, because sometimes I just would like to be here I express this in a peaceful mood, but sometimes it causes tremendous suffering for myself, and as such it's not a problem for others, but it can be a problem if my suffering is exteriorized and affects others. Sometimes I'm genuinely frustrated, because most humans, almost all humans, most humans, they are, I wouldn't say sinful, because I'm not in a mood to use a religious language, but they are excessive in various ways. And honestly, I don't really care if I don't care about the personal flaws of people as such. Everyone has its own vices, one might say. But I am frustrated because it's okay for most people to be flawed in some aspects, and when I'm calm, I don't care if the people their vices, if it's moderate, I don't really care, because precisely historically the attempts to bring about really a perfect, in a sense of a morally perfect, in a sense of here that's really in a negative religious sense, a utopian moral society, which has been a constant driving force behind most of Western, here, which means white, in this usage, history, and it still is the case today. The insane woke ideology, anti-racist, etc., that's just another reappearance of the here, Kevin MacDonald is clear-minded. That's the same religious impulse that white people have. Religious here, it's really kind of in a negative sense, the need to be moralistic, and the will to control others by shaming and moralizing. It can be good when it's properly balanced. It's necessary to peaceful human interaction, but when it's done in a moralistic sense, not to bring about harmony to the community, but to take moral power and psychological influence over others, that's a tendency of the left. Nietzsche here is clear-minded. Behind those who want to constantly shame others, there is a secret will to power. But then the other excess would be, therefore we don't care, and that would be anarchy, really, in a nihilistic way. It has to be rejected as well. But yeah, so what was I saying? I know empirically that I have a tendency to be excessive in most of what I do, and I'm frustrated because of course I want to avoid mistakes and flaws and errors, etc. Yeah, I'm partly frustrated because ideally I would like to be wise, but sometimes I just would like to be able to express, say, my emotions, but not in a sentimental, self-pitying, romantic way, not in a feminine way. Maybe sometimes I have this tendency, but to express my emotion in a sense of to make jokes, to make sometimes I have a will to power, and I know it's negative when it's excessive, but sometimes I just have a pride in the not in the arrogant, excessive way, but in a common sense way. That's the problem of white people in the modern world, and not in the modern world, in the contemporary time, and the problem of the Germans historically. When you are a German, how do you assert yourself without wreaking havoc, without causing too much harm to others? That's a problem for white people at large, but specifically for German, because it's even more intense. I say this while laughing here, but when you are a German, if I am not an ethnic, empirical German, here it's kind of irrelevant because metaphysically I'm a German. When you are a German, because of the historical context, when you try to assert yourself, and because you are a German, it's not that you try, that you have to and you want to assert yourself. How do you do so without I laugh, but without causing too much, without wreaking too much havoc? Because here that's common sense, one might say, but after 1945, the will to power of the Germans and the Japanese as well, it could not morally and politically exert itself in politics precisely. So they unconsciously, but actually that's right, the driving force towards expansion, which is kind of positive, but it can also be negative. That's another force which is pervading the entire universe. One might say the expanding force of the Germans, it had to be directed in economic matters to, and it has been successfully achieved, that the economic miracle of Japan and Germany in the 1950s yeah. How do you find a measured and balanced way to I wouldn't say to control, but to regulate in a good sense, to regulate German will to power without causing too much problems. And here I will conclude on a serious note, which is what incentivized me to produce this kind of video in the first place. I am tormented in a way, but not in a punishing moral way, but tormented because of inner conflicts, which are the expression of universal forces in a way, conflicting, contradicting forces, and I am not fully aware of this, but I really try to do good, but there are sometimes there are conflicting views of what good is. The Anglo-Saxons, they really have helped me, and they continue to help me tremendously, because they bring sanity and balance to the German excesses, one might say. In The Godfather, that's an Italian family with an adopted German child, Tom Hagen, which is kind of the moral sanity in the insane mafia family. And Tom Hagen, that's a German among Italians. But in my view, that would be the Anglo-Saxon among the Germans, and the Anglo-Saxons are to the Germans what Tom Hagen is to the Corleone family. the Godfather, Don Corleone, what actually he thinks is, if only my sons were like the adopted child. Yeah, he actually secretly he prefers Michael. No, it's not even secret, but he prefers Michael. But actually, maybe a part of him, he really loves Tom Hagen. I think that's the name of the actor. I don't know. No, that's Robert Duvall. Yeah, Tom Hagen is the name of the character, not the actor. Yeah, but he has deep affection for Tom Hagen, the German adopted child. And maybe the German Godfather. Of course, actually, the Anglo-Saxons, they are a Germanic, and even sometimes kind of a German people, but they are the child of the German family, which brings balance, in a way. I will conclude by saying that I am really tormented constantly, not in a from a moralistic standpoint. I can be. How should I explain this? Torment here means kind of torn between conflicting tendencies that it's not good versus bad. These are different opposing views. It's more complex than here. Let us take the example order and chaos. Of course, order sounds very good and chaos sounds very bad. But precisely, if you are a little bit more subtle, really order. An example of order would be precisely the excesses of the Germans in the past century, and it's almost universally considered bad. And maybe there's a reason, because really too much order can be negative, and of course chaos is negative, but if chaos is kind of balanced in a sense, if it means enabling kind of spontaneity within a too rigid structure, it can be good. I'm not in favor of chaos, but I have realized here that's only specific to me, that an excess, I have precisely attempted, because I have a super ego, Kantian and Hegelian super ego, who tries to be rigorous, orderly, pure, moral, and in a way it's kind of good, but when the super ego becomes excessive, Nietzsche comes to the rescue, one might say. If I have to use the psychoanalytical German archetypes, I understood this many months ago, but I'm kind of torn between Hegel and Nietzsche, and I'm stuck in the middle with Kant. And here, I will be honest again. Marshall Mathers, that's one of my heroes, and his life has been a constant struggle between Eminem, Slim Shady, and Marshall. Namely, he's a super self. That's Eminem, the superstar, the lyrical genius. Slim Shady, that's, when I say his lower self, but he has precisely succeeded in transcending the most negative tendencies of human nature in an artistic way. And Marshall Mathers, that's the ordinary person with his personal problems, who tries to find balance, one might say. And Eminem, that's his life has been a constant struggle, which has produced wonderful art, artistic expressions. And but the problem, one might say, my problem in a way is that, of course, when I really suffer, I try to draw inspiration from Eminem, from Marshall Mathers, but the struggles that Marshall has gone through, they have been very intense for him, and he has suffered a lot. And here I'm not a moralistic leftist. Oh, if you are rich, no, he does. It's not important, because he has suffered much more than most people, in spite of his wealth, or maybe partly because of his wealth and success. But he has suffered tremendously. But what I would like to say, my problem is that he has suffered a lot as an individual, I acknowledge that. But his suffering have only impacted, in a way, I mean only, the music industry, that's already a tremendous achievement, but it's only music in a sense. And I have a very high view of music. But when the problems, they become kind of political, it's much more complex in a way to handle and to find balance. Because here, to formulate this differently, I have tremendous admiration for Marshall Mathers, for his talent and his songs and his personality, etc. But I've thought about this for many months. When Eminem, the artist, when he makes a bad song or a bad album, it doesn't happen very frequently, but when he kind of fails to live up to his own standards, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, the consequences, of course, for him, maybe he feels bad because he received negative criticism, or he suffers because he's tormented by his own set of standards, so he suffers personally, psychologically, and that's bad for him, of course. But the consequences for others eventually is just that he might disappoint a few fans, or lower sales, or get criticism from the media. Of course, that's bad for him and for them, but that's just the entertainment industry in the realm of music. My torment is that when I fail, of course I suffer personally, and I try to avoid bringing suffering to others, but yeah, the realm in a way is not the same. Precisely because, that's what I intended to talk about, there is a conflict between spontaneity and responsibility, and I try to be more responsible first for myself and for others, but sometimes I have really a conflict between the moral duty that I have to be responsible for everyone eventually, and I try to, but I am not yet, or I am not able at this moment in time to be responsible for all others, because first I cannot even be completely responsible for myself, and yeah. there is a conflict between what pleases the individual and what is right. And morality consists in doing what is right and not what pleases you, but doing what is right brings a feeling of satisfaction and a sense of self-worth. That's the moral gratification. That's the reason why so many leftists virtue signal, because they feel good. Because doing the right thing makes you feel good. So but then if you do the right thing because it makes you feel good, that's the view of Kantian ethics. I have a tendency to do things which hurt me because I have this kind of Christian Kantian view that in order to do good you have to hurt yourself. But if you hurt yourself constantly, life is an endless miserable struggle. You live in constant misery. And here I will talk about my personal story. If I have tried to be really a moral person by living in a way for others, I have said everything, shared everything over the month. But I have realized that not only by doing this, I did no good for myself, except maybe a sense of having done what I thought was correct, but I did no good to others either. So I try to whatever I do, whatever I say, I struggle constantly. Even if I lose the struggle at some moments, I will not have ceased to struggle. Even if I make really wrong decision or flawed decision, I nonetheless struggle constantly. I'm not saying that I can win, or that I can win all the time or when I would like to, but for me to win means that the others have to win as well. It has to be a mutual gain in a way. I don't know if I can win, but I know that I struggle in all meanings of the word. I struggle in the sense of I suffer, and I struggle in the sense of I struggle with myself eventually, but truth is in the center, but the center is the result of a process of conflicting forces which pull on one side and on the other, and to find balance, when there's Nietzsche on one side and Hegel on the other, and they try to tear you apart, it's really difficult. Because here, I know that power and influence and status and prestige, they tend to corrupt. In this sense, it's a good thing that as of now I have no status. And I know, of course, when power corrupts, That's why the Anglo-Saxons, with their balance of powers, that's good. Sometimes, to be powerless, yeah, because maybe that's a conclusion about wisdom. I am frustrated, and I have been frustrated because I am powerless. I do not seek political power consciously, but I would like to be able to in a way to influence others, but not not to be blindly followed, but at least to be able to express my ideas. And in this day and age, it's very difficult because the moralistic leftist, etc. But I'm intelligent enough to know that of course power corrupts. So power has to be limited, and to be powerless, it can be, and it is, and it can be very frustrating. But maybe the wisdom of God that I do not possess yet, or that I do not possess as of now, is precisely to know that being powerless, even though it's very frustrating, when you think that you could do good, but that's the Boromir. He wants the ring because he wants to do good, but actually the ring corrupts. Yeah. So yeah, to be powerless is very frustrating, but if it prevents corruption because of power, then it's good. But then you cannot remain powerless constantly if you really have intelligent things to share. But here, that's why, if you are intelligent, you anticipate that if you gain status and influence at some moment, the law of corruption will not have changed. So you have to plan that power has to be limited in a way by counter powers. Because here I will conclude by the book How to Read a Book, Mr. Mortimer J. Adler. My ideal, well, when I'm really stable, it's really the classical liberal ideal where debate, intelligent debate, is supposed to resolve as many conflicts as possible. And when you are wise, the ideal of a debate, first, a society where intelligent debates would be the norm. That's the ideal. But then within an intelligent debate, the ideal is to acknowledge that the other might be right. And it's Mortimer J. Adler talks about this. It's kind of deluding, because when you enter into a debate, most of the time, whatever you say, you don't want to discover the truth. You want to force your views onto others, even if you do this rationally. It's kind of an expression of the will to power here. The nonsense of the postmodern deconstruction, there is a part of truth in a sense that behind even rational scientific discourse, there is a will to power. Here Nietzsche is kind of lucid, but it doesn't contradict the fact that science is true. That's the excess of the deconstructionist, but simply it's true that behind science, the white ideal, that's the people who, when they become really insane, they say, oh, science, that's white supremacy, empiricism, facts, rationality, that's white supremacy, etc. That's really excessive, but actually it has to be acknowledged that they say something partly relevant, namely that science is a way for white people to express their will to power. It doesn't discredit science, because science is true independently of the particular, one might say, independently of the group which produces, or the individual which produces the scientific view. So in a sense, I'm a classical white supremacist. No, a classical scientist, a classical Western scientist. But I acknowledge that it's true that the scientific enterprise is an expression of a will to power, and that here, I have to be honest, the views of the libertarians, they are more intelligent, wise, moderate in a good sense, and wise in the best sense than most other views. But it's true that behind this, behind people like Molyneux or Hans Hermann Hoppe, there is a will to power, and it's not derogatory, but it's maybe it's the best, in the moral sense, the best way of expressing one's own will to power, namely to regulate this through the expression of rational, intelligent debate. I will conclude the video here. And it's 8:35 a.m. I will go about my daily routine. Usually in the morning, I take care of my singular self, so that then for the rest of the day I can focus on producing universal content, which I intend to do by continuing my videos on home economics and continuing my work. Yeah, but maybe, depending on the circumstances, once my structured videos that I have in mind, the few that I intend to produce, which are really planned in a way, the structure at least, maybe I will record daily videos for a while, maybe 30 minutes long, where I will just share my thoughts. I don't know yet, but now I will go about my routine to try to bring order in a productive way